Iran just made the single biggest strategic mistake of the 21st century. That sounds dramatic, and you have heard that line before. But stay with me, because what I am about to show you is not a military story. It is not a missile story. It is not even really an oil story. It is a story about how a group of nations quietly decided to make an entire country irrelevant. Not by bombing them, not by sanctioning them into oblivion, but by picking up construction equipment and redrawing the map of the earth itself. And here is what nobody is talking about. Iran did not just lose a military confrontation. Iran lost the one card, the only card that gave them real power at every negotiating table for the last 4 decades. And they lost it because they played it. We are going to walk through exactly what happened, what is being built right now as we speak, and why, when this is all over, Iran is going to wake up and realize that the world simply routed around them. Let us start at the very beginning, because to understand what is being built, you first need to understand why it matters so much. There is a stretch of water on the map, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, that has functioned for decades as the most dangerous economic choke point on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. It sits at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, connecting it to the Gulf of Oman, and from there to the open ocean. And here is the number that should make you stop and think. Approximately 20 million barrels of oil pass through that strait every single day. Not 20 million barrels from one country, not 20 million barrels from the region, but 20 million barrels out of every 100 that the entire world trades on any given day. 1/5 of global energy flows through a corridor you could swim across on a calm morning. And every single drop of it, every barrel leaving Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, has to pass through that same 21-mile gap. According to the United States Energy Information Administration, there is no other way out. The agency has been clear. Some choke points have no practical alternatives, and Hormuz is the prime example. Now look at who sits right next to that gap. Iran. For Tehran, the Strait of Hormuz was never just a waterway. It was a loaded gun pointed directly at the head of the global economy. Every country that runs on oil, China, Japan, South Korea, India, every European nation importing Gulf crude, was effectively dependent on Iran not pulling the trigger. And Iran knew it. They knew it in every nuclear negotiation. They knew it every time the West threatened to tighten sanctions. They knew it every time a proxy conflict in Yemen or Iraq or Syria started pushing the international community toward confrontation. The strait was always sitting on the table between them and whoever they were dealing with, unspoken, understood, devastating if used. Then, in 2026, Iran used it. And that crisis changed everything. On February 28th, a coordinated military operation was launched against Iran, targeting military facilities, nuclear sites, and leadership structures. Iran's Revolutionary Guards responded almost immediately. According to naval mission reports, vessels in the area began receiving radio transmissions from Iranian forces stating that no ship was permitted to transit the Strait of Hormuz. By March 2nd, a senior military advisor made the formal announcement on state media. The strait was closed. Any vessel that tried to cross it would, in his words, be set ablaze. The world did not just experience an inconvenience, it experienced a full-scale economic cardiac arrest. Maritime traffic through the strait declined by more than 90% within days of the closure, removing somewhere between 17 and 20 million barrels of oil per day from global markets in what analysts are already describing as potentially the largest single energy supply disruption in modern history. Major container shipping companies suspended transits entirely. Attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea resumed, forcing the remaining Suez Canal traffic to reroute around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to delivery times and compounding the shock. Oil prices did not just rise, they screamed. Dubai crude reached a historic record of $166 per barrel. Brent crude climbed back to $114 per barrel after ceasefire negotiations collapsed. In California, gasoline prices exceeded $5 per gallon by mid-March, according to local government data. Insurance premiums on tankers approaching the strait exploded overnight. Iraq, the world's sixth largest oil producer, was forced to cut production in its southern region by 70%, from 3.3 million barrels per day down to just 900,000. Saudi Arabia's largest refinery, processing 550,000 barrels per day, had to shut down in early March. Major energy firms invoked force majeure, a move described by analysts as unprecedented in the history of Gulf oil and gas production. Banks in Qatar closed their doors. Refineries began shutting down because the crude they needed was not arriving. And the ripple hit every country on Earth that uses fuel, ships goods, or buys anything manufactured in Asia, which is essentially every country on Earth. Now, here is the moment that changed history, not the crisis itself, but what happened next. The Gulf states watched all of this unfold. They watched the paralysis, the panic, the economic damage spreading across the planet in real time. And they made a decision: never again. Let me show you what that decision looks like in practice, because this is where the story stops being about diplomacy and starts being about something much more permanent. Pull up a map in your mind, or go look at one right now, because this geography matters. Focus on the Musandam Peninsula, that sharp finger of Omani territory that juts northward toward the Strait of Hormuz at the very top of the Arabian Peninsula. Now look at the distance between the Persian Gulf coastline on one side of that peninsula and the Gulf of Oman coastline on the other side. It is short, surprisingly short, just a few dozen kilometers of land. Rugged land, mountainous land, geologically brutal land, but land. And the idea now sitting on the desks of Gulf ministers, not as a theoretical exercise but as a serious strategic planning document, is this: what if you cut straight through it? What if you dug a canal directly through the Musandam Peninsula, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman in a straight line? Tankers leaving Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, or the United Arab Emirates would never need to go anywhere near the Strait of Hormuz. They would turn into the canal, pass through Omani territory, come out the other side into open ocean, and be completely, permanently, irreversibly beyond Iran's reach. No Iranian territorial waters, no Iranian coastal missiles, no Iranian fast attack boats, no Iranian sea mines, no Iranian drone swarms. The entire architecture of asymmetric naval intimidation that Tehran spent decades and billions of dollars building would be rendered useless, not because it was destroyed, but because the ships would no longer be there to be threatened. The route engineers are working with starts at the narrowest point of the Musandam Peninsula, along the Gulf side near the coast of the United Arab Emirates. It cuts through the Hajar Mountains and comes out near the region on the Gulf of Oman coast. According to analysis cited by news reports and engineering research, the distance between the 2 points is approximately 38 kilometers, or just 24 miles. For context, the Panama Canal is about 80 kilometers long. The Suez Canal is nearly 200 kilometers. This would be one of the shorter mega canals in modern history. And yet, and this is the part that makes experienced engineers go very quiet, those 20 to 50 kilometers might represent the hardest construction challenge ever seriously attempted by human beings. Because this is not flat desert. This is not sand to dredge. This is the Hajar Mountains. The range rises to over 2,000 meters. In some stretches, limestone peaks soar to more than 6,500 feet. The rock is composed of ophiolite and compressed limestone layers, folded by millions of years of tectonic activity into one of the hardest geological formations on the planet. You cannot excavate this. You cannot scoop it out. You have to blast it, cut it, and physically remove millions upon millions of tons of rock before a single tanker can pass through. And the tankers that need to pass are not small boats. Modern, very large crude carriers, the vessels that haul the bulk of Gulf oil exports, are over 300 meters long and weigh more than 300,000 tons when fully loaded. To accommodate them, The canal has to be carved at least 25 meters deep and between 200 and 300 meters wide. You are not cutting a ditch through those mountains. You are reshaping an entire mountain range. The cost reflects that reality. You will see a figure of $100 billion cited in a lot of sources. But as detailed analysis has reported, the massive cost and complexity of the project would likely push the actual bill to many multiples of that 208 estimate of $200 billion. And that 208 figure was calculated in a different era of construction costs. The Panama Canal expansion, one of the most complex infrastructure projects of the modern era, cost $5.25 billion. The rock excavation required at Musandam would demand 40 to 60 times that level of geological effort. The depth requirements are greater, the width requirements are greater, and the seismic risk in the Hajar Range adds a layer of engineering complexity that has no real parallel in any modern canal project. As one analyst put it, if you think the Strait of Hormuz is a vulnerable choke point and that a canal that bypasses it is a better option, you have not spent much time thinking about how vulnerable a canal would be. Every pumping station, every canal lock, every logistical node would sit within range of Iranian strike capabilities. The redundancy required to protect such infrastructure would be extraordinary. This is not a construction project. This is a geological event and a strategic calculation being made with full awareness of those constraints. And yet the Gulf states are studying it seriously, because the cost of not building it just became very, very clear. Now, and this is important, Musandam is not the only option on the table. There is a second route being discussed, and in some ways it is more startling than the first. A 950-kilometer canal through the empty quarter, the vast desert expanse. As reported by regional news outlets, a Saudi-backed feasibility study proposed a 950-kilometer canal linking the Gulf to the Arabian Sea, cutting through Saudi Arabia and Yemen. The project envisioned a 150-meter-wide, 25-meter-deep channel that could allow Gulf producers, including the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, to export oil without passing through Hormuz at all. No mountains, mostly flat terrain. From a pure rock-moving perspective, it is far more feasible than the Musandam route. But stop and think about 950 kilometers for a moment. Water evaporation across that span in one of the hottest environments on the surface of the Earth is a serious engineering problem. The risk of silting, the canal gradually filling in with wind-blown desert sand across nearly 1,000 kilometers, and the maintenance costs to keep that dredged indefinitely are astronomical. The feasibility study put the price at $200 billion in 2008 money. Costs have not gone down. There are also elevations of up to 700 meters along parts of the route, meaning the perception of a perfectly flat desert crossing is misleading. Significant earthworks are still required, and the route's proximity to the Yemen border creates a security risk that no Gulf state is taking lightly right now. That said, the empty quarter route does have one significant advantage. It is one of the least populated regions on Earth. Land acquisition complications are minimal. The environmental footprint compared to carving through a mountain peninsula is substantially lower. Both routes are on the table. Both are being actively studied. And the 2026 crisis transformed them from theoretical engineering exercises into urgent strategic priorities. But here is something you need to understand clearly. The canal is a project measured in decades. It will not open next year. It will not open in 5 years. And the Gulf states cannot afford to wait decades for a solution when the crisis is happening right now. So while the long-term vision is being mapped out, something else is already happening. Something faster, something cheaper, and something already working. The immediate solution involves ports on the eastern coast of the Arabian Peninsula. Specifically, a natural deep water port on the United Arab Emirates' eastern coast is being pushed into full operational capacity. It sits sheltered by the rugged cliffs of the Hajar Mountains and opens directly onto the Gulf of Oman. It is completely outside the Strait of Hormuz. Operated by a major ports company, It already had infrastructure capable of handling large tankers. The cost of new pier construction and pipeline integration for this bypass is somewhere between $200 million and $500 million. Compare that to a $200 billion canal. This is the immediate solution. Not the permanent one, but the one that works this week while the crisis is active. Alongside that port, another port on the Gulf of Oman coast, also entirely outside the strait, is now operating at maximum capacity as a bypass export point. Crucially, it is the terminal for a crude oil pipeline running from the interior of the country to the open ocean. According to energy analysts, this pipeline allows crude exports to bypass the strait entirely. At full operational capacity, that system represents a significant partial solution. But here is where this gets even more interesting, because the strategic potential of these ports goes well beyond the oil of one nation. Think about this carefully. Iraq cannot currently export from its southern ports because the strait is blocked, but Iraqi oil can be transported overland by truck or via inland pipeline connections through neighboring countries and then exported through these eastern ports to global markets. Kuwait's oil can reach the same bypass ports the same way. Qatar's liquefied natural gas is more complex, as it requires specialized ships and cannot simply be trucked across a border. But Qatar's crude oil and condensate exports can be transferred via pipeline and shipped from there. These are not solutions at scale, but they are strands in a growing bypass network. What this means is that these eastern ports are no longer just national export gateways. They are transforming into a collective regional energy hub, a bypass architecture for all Gulf oil. Every country that connects to this network removes itself from the list of nations Iran can hold hostage through Hormuz. Every barrel that moves through these ports instead of the strait makes Tehran's choke point strategy a little more obsolete, and every new connection makes that irrelevance accelerate. Now, let us talk about the pipeline network that has been quietly operating for decades and is now being pushed to its absolute maximum. One major pipeline system runs from the eastern province of Saudi Arabia all the way to a port on the Red Sea. Its daily transport capacity following recent expansions is up to 7 million barrels. According to official statements, the company expects the network to reach full capacity in the near term. That means Saudi Arabia can export a significant portion of its oil through the Red Sea, entirely bypassing the strait. These were backup systems, emergency options. Now, they are the primary arteries keeping the global economy alive. But here is the geopolitical signal embedded in all of this, the one that is more significant than the pipelines themselves. While other nations were issuing ultimatums, the Gulf was already executing its own solution on its own initiative without asking permission. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are not waiting for an external security umbrella to protect them. They are building their own strategic independence, and they are building it fast. Multiple exit points are making Iran's strategy exponentially harder to execute. If one port is struck, another operates. If that one is struck, the Red Sea port operates. If all three are hit simultaneously, and Iran would need to conduct a massive coordinated multi-front attack to achieve that, at least one remains functional. The redundancy is built in by design, and as every Gulf nation connects to this network, Iran's leverage erodes further, not from military pressure, but from geography being rewritten around them. Now, there is something the coverage of this conflict has not given nearly enough attention to: sea mines. The 11 million barrel daily shortfall means the Strait of Hormuz needs to physically reopen. And reopening it means dealing with something that carries real, serious, dangerous implications. Iran possesses a stockpile of thousands of sea mines. Clearing mines laid in the shallow, current-driven waters of the strait, even under ideal conditions, can take weeks or months. In an active conflict environment, the sweeping operations are extraordinarily dangerous, achingly slow, and require extraordinary precision. Mine clearing is particularly challenging in a place like Hormuz, because while the boundaries are defined and the current patterns known, ships have virtually no maneuvering room. That is why mine clearance is among the first priorities of the multi-nation military coalition now operating in the region, systematically working through the strait meter by meter before full commercial shipping can resume. While aircraft are targeting coastal missile positions and fast attack boat bases, mine-sweeping fleets are doing the quieter, slower, equally critical work of making the strait physically safe to transit. Let us be clear about how the three tracks fit together. The bypass infrastructure of ports and existing pipelines is the insurance policy. It keeps some oil flowing while the strait is closed. The military coalition is the immediate solution. It is physically reopening the corridor. The canal, whether through Musandam or the empty quarter, is the long-term resolution, the permanent answer. All three are running simultaneously right now. Step back from the operational detail for a moment and look at what this means strategically for Iran, because this is the part that should alarm far more than any missile strike. Iran's entire asymmetric naval strategy was built on one assumption, that ships would always pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Its fleet of fast attack boats, hundreds of small, agile craft designed specifically to swarm and overwhelm larger vessels in shallow, narrow, confined waters. Its thousands of sea mines calibrated for a strait with defined current patterns and no room to maneuver. Its network of coastal anti-ship missiles positioned to cover that narrow corridor. Its drone swarms calibrated for that specific geography. Every dollar spent, every facility built, every weapon designed and deployed, all of it was premised on one thing: the ships being there, the choke point being the choke point. If tankers no longer pass through that corridor, if they route through a Musandam Canal or down to the eastern ports or across to the Red Sea, then Iran's entire arsenal of asymmetric naval power becomes exactly what analysts are now openly calling it: an expensive collection of useless hardware with no strategic target. A weapon without a target is not a weapon. It is a maintenance bill. This is what is happening to Iran right now, not because they were defeated in battle, but because the battle they prepared for, the one they trained for, invested in, and built their entire naval doctrine around, is being made irrelevant before their eyes. The geography they weaponized is being re-engineered out from under them. For Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, this moment represents something far beyond crisis management. It marks a fundamental shift in their strategic identity. These nations have historically been defined by what they sell, oil, and by their dependence on an external security umbrella to protect the routes through which they sell it. What is being built now is something different, something more sovereign. These nations are positioning themselves not just as energy suppliers, but as the architects of global trade routes. They are making their own export infrastructure independent of both Iranian threats and external protection. That is a profound consolidation of sovereign power. It means they are no longer passengers in the global energy system. They are increasingly the ones deciding how and where the system flows. The canal running through Musandam, if it is built, will cost hundreds of billions of dollars. But what it buys, permanent blackmail-free, militarily unthreatened access to global markets, is a strategic necessity that no price tag can fully capture. Gulf capital is no longer just selling oil. It is selling the guarantee of uninterrupted, secure, reliable, blackmail-free energy flow to the world. That is a fundamentally different and far more powerful thing to be selling. The maps of the Earth are sometimes redrawn, not with armies, but with construction machinery and steel pipes. The waters of the Strait of Hormuz will continue to flow between its two shores long after this conflict ends. But a waterway through which the global economy no longer chooses to root itself is not a strategic asset. It is a footnote. It is a reminder of leverage that used to exist and no longer does. The engineering resolve of the Gulf states is in the process of doing what no military campaign fully achieves on its own: rendering a decades-long blackmail doctrine permanently obsolete. Not by destroying Iran's weapons, but by building around them, by making them irrelevant, by redrawing the map so that the choke point is no longer the choke point. Iran fired its most powerful card, and the world is responding not with a bigger card, but by changing the game entirely. The shackles are being broken, not with missiles, but with math, engineering, and the cold strategic logic of nations that finally got tired of being held hostage. The game is starting over, and this time, Iran does not control the board.